The organization I work with, Northern Forest Canoe Trail, we have about a little over 1,000 members right now. So looking at a crowd like this is great. A couple of thank yous really quick. I'd like to thank Aleks for the coordinating. It was a very relaxing experience. And I'd also like to thank David and Marilyn for their hospitality as well. The warning really quick. This is a warning. Don't be too concerned, but there is going to be a little audience participation. I have crews that go out in the field and do work on this 740-mile corridor, and I'm a big advocate for stretching, so I don't want anybody to get hurt during the course of this presentation. So if we could all just raise your hands, a little stretch out there, okay, because I don't want anybody to pull something when it comes time to raise your hand. And also, if we could just give a burly yo! Okay, great, because there'll be times, and you'll know when they are, where I'm going to ask. I'm going to tell you this beforehand so there's not an awkward little pause, but you'll see pictures, and I'm going to want you to just shout out what you think of adjectives and nouns about that type of experience, because when we get into management, I'm finding that experience plays a big part in management. Just a little bit of a bio and background about myself. I got sucked into the recreation world. I wasn't planning on going in there. And if I had to speak to children, I'd say, you think twice about going into the recreation world. But it happens. It'll grab you. It sucked me in, and I've been doing it for 15 years now. Before the Northern Forest Canoe Trail, it was parcel orientated, which I'm finding out is a lot easier than this type of geography, the linear orientation. I've been at the organization for 5 years, and it's a young organization. I'll get into a little bit of the history, and I got to thank Matt, because he covered a little bit of that history for me. That was good. This is a good segue, because that's going to shave a little bit of time off. Let's see a quick raise of hands. Who's familiar with the Northern Forest Canoe Trail? Okay, great. Then this really is a good audience for me to talk to. A little overview here. This right here is what people in the area I live in call the Northern Forest Canoe Trail. Oh no, the Northern Forest right there. I think folks that have their sights set north of the 60 line might refer to this as the Southern Forest, but I think it just doesn't sound as good, the Southern Forest Canoe Trail. I like the sound of Northern Forest Canoe Trail, But just chopping this up, there's a lot of territory here. The trail, you'll see in the next slide, the trail goes from Old Forge, New York, which is right in about here, to Fort Kent, Maine, which is right in about there. When we're thinking about geography, oh my goodness, the stories in this area. That's probably one of the the icing on the cake for me is getting to know the folks and hear the stories. It's amazing. We'll talk a little bit about some of them as we go along. But what defines this area is the same thing that defines so many different areas. Well, as we've been watching all the presentations, what draws me in is the images and the pictures of the geography, the stone, the mountains, the rivers. When we think about this area, we've got old Appalachian chain coming up. We've got giant granite batholiths. We've got the White Mountains with their granite. And it's all very old, ancient ranges. So this spills over into management as well, because when we have an old area like that, what happens is down by the rivers, you end up with a lot of clay, a lot of silt. It's the type of soils that don't lend themselves very well to impact, which really, when I think about managing the Northern Forest Canoe Trail, that's one of the big components is impact. And when you think about all the different factors between that 740 miles, you can easily get into a lot of a situation where you're putting out fires, or you're experiencing white noise, like a television set. And some people might remember this. I know it's a kind of something I grew up with. You know, that white noise, and you got the antennas, the rabbit ears, and you're playing around with it, and you're trying to get that station in. That's where we are with the management of the trail right now. We're getting rid of that white noise. We're moving those antennas around, and we're coming up with a management plan so we can fulfill our agreements. And I'll get into that really soon. But the other component of this area is just thinking about the people, the history. As Matt pointed out, the trail's comprised of Native American travel corridors. In this area, this is Algonquin Mohawk territory, Abenaki, Penobscot. As Matt mentioned, the Native Trails folks, Native Trails Incorporated, these three fellas, Ron Cantor, Mike Krepner, Randy Madras, they had two interests, Native American culture and as well as the travel corridors and their corridors and mapping it. They were way into mapping. And after they pieced together what was going on in this whole area, they realized you could go from Old Forge, New York to Fort Kent, Maine by piecing those together. That's not to say that ever in ancient history Native Americans traveled this route, but it's pieced together travel corridors to kind of make that happen. This ribbon of red, that's the Northern Forest Canoe Trail. Now, I don't necessarily like showing it as just this linear corridor because in many ways it's a choose-your-own adventure. A lot of people piece it together so many different ways. But it's a great way to represent this. If you look at our 13 map set, we just have points of interest, and we describe these areas, whether they're rapids or access points. But when I look at this, that line goes through about 45 communities, end to end. And the history in this area is one that, you know, I'm just going to categorize and group. You know, we had the Native Americans following their corridors, following food, following weather. Settlers come in, a lot of logging occurred, and we're really at a period in this area where logging gained such a degree of efficiency that these 45 communities really lost a lot of their oomph. They revolved around that industry, and right now they're looking at opportunities like the Northern Forest Canoe Trail as a way to you know, kind of rebuild a bit of industry back into these places. And for me, and most of the organization, I mean, we're a small organization. I look at this like, I know people along this ribbon of red better than I do in my own community. I'm out in it that much. I kind of look at it as if you ball it all up, that's my community. If you take that little red ribbon of yarn and put it into a ball, that's kind of the community I've known for 5 years. A brief description. You know, like I say, we've got the geography is a challenge, and we've got a very small, dedicated staff. You can see through the titles and the people. That right there is the folks that are in our office: executive director, membership and outreach. Like I said, we're a membership organization. That's where we get a good portion of our ability to perform the management work and keep the trail alive. We have marketing partnerships, and that really is our commitment to rural economic development with those 45 communities, as well as just keeping relationships with corporations that are in the paddle industry. We have a youth program. I think, you know, it was great hearing Stephanie talk about, you know, being young and exposed and integrated into the outdoors. In that region that I showed, the Northern Forest region, even within this area where there's this beautiful resource right out your back door, a lot of kids aren't getting to it. So we've been trying really hard to facilitate that where we can. And then what I do as trail director is my focus is stewardship, navigational information, and as far as the stewardship piece, I'm going to get more into the details of that. So our mission can seem overwhelming at times. There's 5 of us in Waitsfield, Vermont, and the trail goes from Old Forge, New York to Fort Kent, Maine. The only way that we can be at all effective is through partnerships, collaborations. There's so much good energy in this area, this Northern Forest area. There's such a focus on the outdoors, getting people back in touch with the outdoors that have lost touch with the outdoors. That's the only way we're able to leverage this corridor for these good aspects. I mean, it's a very, very altruistic organization. When you think about the trail facts, you can also get overwhelmed. There's a lot of detail going on here. And one of the management tools that I've used just to kind of understand it, I'd say the first couple of years was just getting out there. I've probably been on maybe 560 miles of the trail. People ask me all the time, so you must have paddled the whole thing. I wish I did. But the best time to paddle it is when it's also the best time to manage it, unfortunately. So 454 campsites, 182 access points, sign-in boxes, interpretive panels. Definitely a lot of moving parts. We talked a bit about this, but when I say it's a young organization, it started in 2000, really, as Kay Henry and Rob Center. They were the owners of Mad River Canoe, and they had heard a lot of these talks that Native Trails Incorporated was putting on, and they wanted to kind of take that idea and see it to fruition. And they did by incorporating Northern Forest Canoe Trail in 2000. Took about 6 years to get the trail established. National Park Service was involved with a little injection of funding, a bunch of funding sources, public, private, federal. So in 6 years' time, that's a huge mobilization in 6 years. And really the only reason that this trail was a success and that it still exists is because of what happens at the local level. Those 45 communities, when we went to make the 13 map set, it's all local knowledge, getting people around the table, talking about the idea, passing the fire, getting people pumped up. The interpretive panels that we have out there, we've got 28. That's just little billboards for the communities to brag about themselves. There's so many stories in those communities, and that all happens at the local level. So in my eyes, that's ownership right there. And we wouldn't have a trail if it didn't have that ownership at the local level. Most important piece right here. Getting on with the history of that region, a lot of parcelization occurred. Now, our relationship with landowners, Northern Forest Canoe Trail doesn't own any land. We don't own easements. What we do, organizations like river conservancies will use us as a way to say, it's just one more kind of feather in the cap about why a parcel should be conserved. But we don't really get involved in that. We don't have the capacity to do that. What we do is we work with landowners and we do handshake agreements. In New England and New York, the states have these landowner liability laws. They say if you're not charging a fee for use of the land and you're not doing anything of gross negligence, you have no need to be concerned of any kind of liability, which is great because that's a concern that you pop into your head when you're first thinking about the public using your land. So that's for us, that helps out quite a bit. We work with the landowners, and there's about, I'd say, 60 private landowners across the trail that we have these agreements with, and we also have a lot of public and federal land to kind of piece together that corridor. There's somewhere in the neighborhood of 62 portage trails, totaling about 55 miles. That's going over land. The 454 campsites that's also, somebody's property. Most of those are on the public lands, but we're kind of filling in the gaps, filling in the pieces. We've got the Adirondacks over in New York, and we've got a lot of sections in Maine that are developed for recreation. But that middle part of the trail, that's a place where that type of philosophy really hasn't existed before. You look at the Adirondacks, and people buy cars and vehicles for their roof racks so that they can move their boats around. That's kind of the mentality and the philosophy in the Adirondacks. But this kind of, I like this graphic because, to me, this is why the Northern Forest Canoe Trail exists. If you look at any of these pieces that are connected, if one of them falls out, it all kind of crumbles. Allowed use, well, comes from happy landowners. If we don't have happy landowners, we're probably not going to have allowed use because there's only two sides of the river. That's how I look at it. So any relationship that I have with a landowner, I put a lot of effort into making sure that there's a lot of trust there and a lot of honesty, and we've got a clear vision. And that's not always easy to do. I've been finding out that, as we're kind of getting rid of that white noise and coming into some more, boxing in some more details to the trail, that's where we're able to have more of a clear agreement. The managed corridor, educated, happy, understood user group, anticipated management, and mitigated impact. That comes right back to happy landowners. That's what they want to see on their property. So that's where it kind of comes into our management plan. Now, the description of trail users, I don't like to necessarily categorize people, but there's trends and patterns. And what we've seen develop is through and section paddlers. So through paddlers, they're making the whole trip. They're going from Old Forge, New York to Fort Kent, Maine. I'd say the average time is maybe 40 days. And it seems to get lower every year because it's the human psychology. I want to beat that time. I want to go a little faster. I think the quickest we've had somebody do it is 21 days and 4 hours. To me, you're kind of blowing through it. There's a lot of interesting things to see, but the multi-day trip, folks, there's sections of the trail, like I said, like in the Adirondacks, where there's that history of use, where there's this whole industry of shuttle services and outfitters. Those types of 3, 4 day, 5 day trail trips. They've existed for a long time, and they're there, and people gravitate towards those. And we're also making those happen in the middle part of the trail where you haven't really seen much recreational use before. And then you got the folks that just head out for a day. So this is the part where I'd like people to shout out what they feel, some adjectives and nouns about, say, serene flat water experiences. Anybody, just shout out. Yo! Adjectives, nouns. Peaceful. What else do we have? Beautiful. Relaxing. Yeah. Heart-pounding fast water experiences. Yeah, a little different, right? A little different. It's just different feel, there's different characteristics. Any adjectives, nouns? That's one of our interns from last year, Betty. She had never been down fast water before. That's our instructor, Rob. She got thrown to the wolves, but it was in a controlled environment. She enjoyed it maybe a couple hours after she was able to collect herself. But this is on our intern training on the Missisquoi River in Vermont. We have an intern program to accomplish a lot of what I would call the middle-sized field projects. It's a 10-week program, and part of it, we invest 3 weeks of training, and then the folks that are in the internship program get to go out and have leadership experiences with volunteers, and we accomplish infrastructure projects. Removed from civilization. Anybody have any nouns and adjectives for that one? Yeah. There are segments I'll show you as we get to another map. Then we have the the actual interaction with the towns. It's kind of neat. There's each town has its own different flavor, and the interesting thing about this trail is, I mean, we've had people that have done through paddles, and they've gone in. They've made it a point to integrate the towns, go in there, stay over, take a shower, go to the movies. Really experience what they have to offer. And then there's people that they just want to blow right through, and they just want to get to that next backwoods location. And all those, when you think about the trail and you think about the experiences, I mean, they all have a different feel to them. And that translates into the management style, which in turn translates into what we do for infrastructure and management. For a place that we would consider a primitive area, you're not going to see a lot of infrastructure in there. You're not going to see a lot of signage in there. And as long as we relay that to the people that are using it, they can enter that area with that understanding. These are the main categories that I'm going to hit on as we're moving forward, just talking about management strategies. So as we're getting this navigational information out there, and I think we have some guidebooks that we've been selling, and I've got some information out on that table about the corridor, and we have the 13 maps. As that goes out there, it's making it easier for more people to get to this corridor, which in turn is increasing the degree of use, which in turn is increasing the degree of impact. We as an organization take responsibility for that. There's a lot of good that comes from publicizing a corridor, as long as there's somebody that's going to be managing the impact. The good things is just getting people connected with nature, getting folks out there. I think there's so many sections of this trail that are good beginner sections that people that are interested in paddling, you can point them in the right direction to kind of climb that ladder. I know myself, I got into paddling early on, and I learned, I kind of break up my learning style into making a lot of mistakes in the first half of it. Fortunately, not the grand mistake, but enough mistakes that I kind of learned like an amoeba early on, just hitting the wall, and then finally make a little advancement. And since, especially joining this organization, I've learned it's better just to paddle with somebody that's more knowledgeable than you, as a good way to kind of build your knowledge base. And as we're telling people about the corridor and we're seeing different degrees of use, we have to understand what those different degrees of use are. So we have 28 of these across the trail, and we encourage paddlers to sign in. It's not only can be like a safety tool. I've had a worried wife call me up 2 years ago because she hadn't heard from her husband for a while, and she kind of gave me the last location where they were. I arrested her nerves a little bit, saying, well, there's not too much cell service in that area. And I said, well, we'll have our trail maintainers go out and check the sign-in boxes and see if they've made any progress, which they did. We got a report back that they had made it where they should be. And I did run into those paddlers not too long after that, and he said, well, I kind of liked being out there without the communication. I was like, well, that made one of you there, but so we use this information, and this is the first year that we've been able to collect it and process it. But this is one of the key ingredients to our management, is just understanding. Now we're going to have a baseline for what the use is in these sections, and over time we can see where it's increasing. So in an area that we don't have a lot of hardened surface and infrastructure, we can tell sooner than later that that's a place we should focus on, and maybe get a log ladder in, because as I mentioned, it's a lot of silty clay. There's some steep banks. If you have people using that same route over time, it's just going to get worn away, become a little bit more dangerous. Plus, it's going to be impact to the landowner's property, and that's something that they don't want to see. So it kind of comes full circle. And a lot of it's just understanding the paddler psychology, because, one, we do want that impact to be isolated, to go down that one spot, which is, kind of why we put up the signage, so we can isolate it and better understand it and manage it. And two, it's like water. We all want to follow the path of least resistance, especially when we're carrying all of our gear. So one thing that we've done I mean, I look at this, and there's different degrees of signage that we'll use, and depending on the area and the degree of use, and if we think it's more of a beginner spot, or if it's a spot that's what we would call more front country, you'd probably see more signage there. And we've just begun to break up the trail where we're marking sections where there's certain characteristics that paddlers are looking for, and then we match those characteristics or characterized sections with the degree of use that's occurring. So we keep the character, but we also have the infrastructure to manage the number of people that are going through there. And that's an example of one of the kiosks that we put up. I mean, with everything that we do, we try to keep it as simple as possible. This right here is a good breakout. I mean, you can see these are fairly new. I mean, we're working on this management project. We call it the long-range management plan in real time. I mean, right now. It was good to hear people throw out nouns and adjectives because we're defining these categories, and this is our first draft at dividing it up with this type of philosophy. And you could see, well, these red areas, they're the most primitive sections on the trail. I mean, the through paddlers, like I mentioned, at this point we have about 25 a year. So those red areas, they're strictly seeing through paddlers. They're the only people that are going through there. And then it kind of breaks out after that. I mean, developed, we've got a place right where you come out of off the Saranac River out of the Adirondacks. We have Plattsburgh, and I'd categorize that as developed. It's a very developed area. Rural developed, these are more of the 40 other communities along the way. And then front country and back country, when you hear those words, you kind of paint a picture in your mind, but we're working on trying to clarify that as part of this management plan. And primitive, to me, is kind of obvious. I mean, it's what a lot of people are striving for, I think, in this audience and the people that have presented. It's that wilderness feeling where you're on your own. An example of matching infrastructure to the degree of use. I've been thinking and dealing with a lot of, I guess I'll say, poo. That's a kind of polite pre-dinner way to say that. But as we've been developing our plan, we're realizing that, to me, that's one of the biggest safety features, is how human waste is managed on a trail like this. When you have certain sections that can see 2,000 people in a year, and then you've got other sections that see 25 people a year, there has to be a gradient to that. I mean, if we just assume that we're going to see at least 500 uses on those, 484 campsites between the end to end, and we had one of these at each one, that'd be a little bit overkill. But we have to be ahead of the game. That's where the sign-in boxes come into play. So, to me, this is the most critical thing to match up with degree of use. And the philosophy for people that paddle the philosophy for people that paddle in New England, it's one where it's not necessarily you're carrying a canister with you and taking everything out. So, and we have a good situation to compost in. So, everything is based on the concept of separating solids and liquids and composting it. It's just easier way to manage. And it's all striving towards sustainability. I mean, we've got feedback factors, which to me, it's almost like a nervous system. We've been working hard to develop this Adopt a Segment program. All of these segments are adopted. You could go to the website and you could see we try to recognize the families and the people that are involved. And it takes that local ownership. But it creates a feedback loop where they're going out there twice a year, giving the feedback to us. And if there's some kind of bad strainer or safety issue, it's almost like we have this nervous system where we find out right away, and then we figure out the best way to address it, whether it's working with the volunteers, our intern program, contractors, whatever it takes. So that's just a real quick overview. I mean, I didn't quite get into the weeds, but I just wanted to show you how we're really working to come up with a structure to the program so that we keep those landowner relationships alive and well. That's the most important thing. So I'm more than happy to talk with anybody about the about the trail, sitting right there, and I'll see you around if you'd like to chat about it, or if you came up with any ideas or feedback about management. Love to talk to you. Thanks.